Before I tell you this story, I need you to understand something. What you're about to hear isn't just another revenge tale. This is about how I discovered my family's darkest secret, survived 18 years of inherited trauma, and finally broke free with $3.3 million they never knew I had coming. If you've ever felt trapped by toxic family patterns, if you've ever wondered whether generational curses are real, or if you've ever dreamed of the perfect revenge against those who destroyed your childhood, this story is for you. Hit that like button if you've ever been the family scapegoat. Comment below if you recognize these toxic patterns in your own family. And please, share this with someone who needs to hear that escape is possible. Because by the end of this story, you'll understand why the ability to apologize, to own your stuff, is a hallmark sign of a healthy family system, and why my family could never, ever do that. My name is Sasha Chen Williams, and I was born into what looked like the American dream in Rochester, New York. My mother, Dr. Elena Chen, was a respected psychiatrist at Strong Memorial Hospital. My father, Marcus Williams, owned 3 successful auto dealerships across Monroe County. We lived in a colonial house in Pittsford, complete with the white picket fence and meticulously maintained garden that screamed suburban perfection. But behind those walls lived a different truth, one passed down through generations like a poisoned heirloom. Generational trauma, also known as intergenerational or transgenerational trauma, is the passing down of traumatic experiences or stressors from one generation to the next. In my family, it wasn't just trauma we inherited. It was a system, a carefully orchestrated pattern of abuse that each generation refined and perfected before passing it to the next. I was 7 when I first understood I was different from other kids. Not because of my mixed heritage, Chinese and black in a predominantly white suburb, but because of how my family operated. While my classmates complained about bedtimes and vegetables, I was learning the intricate rules of survival in the Chen Williams household. Rule number 1, never show weakness. Crying was met with mockery from my mother. Tears are manipulation, she'd say, her clinical voice dissecting my emotions like specimens under a microscope. Stop trying to control us with your weakness. Rule number 2, success is the minimum expectation. Anything less than perfection was betrayal. When I brought home a 96% on my 2nd grade spelling test, my father made me write a 3-page essay on why I'd chosen to embarrass the family with those missing 4 points. Rule number 3, family comes first, but you come last. Every achievement I earned belonged to them. Every failure was mine alone. But the real torment began when my grandmother, Lillian Chen, moved in with us when I was 9. Grandma Lily, as she insisted on being called, was the matriarch of our cursed bloodline. She was the one who'd brought the poison from the old country, wrapped it in American success, and served it with a smile that never reached her eyes. You know, she told me one night as she tucked me in with hands that felt like ice, your great-grandmother in Shanghai used to lock your grandfather in the coal cellar when he disappointed her. Sometimes for days. He learned discipline that way. But you American children, you're too soft. That's why I had to teach your mother properly, and why she needs to teach you. Consistent, one-sided compromise is common in unhealthy relationships where one person does most of the heavy lifting. Over time, this person can be or feel taken advantage of and grow tired, frustrated, or resentful. That was my role in the family, the constant compromiser. The one who absorbed everyone's anger, disappointment, and frustration like a human sponge. When my mother had a bad day at work, I was the one who looked at her wrong at dinner and needed to be corrected with hours of silent treatment followed by a clinical dissection of my character flaws. When my father's dealership numbers dropped, I was the one whose mediocre presence was dragging down the family's success energy. When Grandma Lily felt ignored, I was the ungrateful child who needed to spend my weekend writing letters of apology to ancestors I'd never met for my Western corruption. The compromises started small. Give up your Saturday cartoons to help with Grandma's special projects, which usually involved organizing her collection of newspaper clippings about successful Chinese American children who were everything I wasn't. Skip your friend's birthday party because family dinner is more important than those people. Quit the school play because Williams' children don't perform for others' entertainment. By the time I was 13, I'd compromised away so much of myself that I couldn't remember what I'd wanted in the first place. When partners compromise, they often have to give up something that is important to them, leading to feelings of dissatisfaction and resentment in the long run. But I wasn't a partner, I was a child, and the resentment had nowhere to go but inward. The abuse had a pattern, a rhythm I learned to anticipate like a twisted dance. It would start with the setup, a family gathering where I was displayed like a trophy, expected to recite my achievements, edited to sound more impressive, while standing perfectly still, hands clasped in front of me, speaking only when directly addressed. Then came the test, an impossible question designed for failure. Sasha, explain to Aunt Margaret why you think your B+ in advanced mathematics is acceptable when your cousin Jennifer got an A+ in the same class at her school. There was no right answer. Defend myself, and I was argumentative and disrespectful. Accept the criticism, and I was weak and proved their point. Finally, the punishment, delivered later, in private, where the real work of breaking me down could begin. These sessions could last hours. My mother would analyze my psychological deficiencies while my father listed every dollar they'd wasted on my existence. Grandma Lily would sit in her chair, knitting, occasionally adding observations about how in China, children like me would have been corrected much more efficiently. The truly insidious part was how they made me complicit in my own abuse. Signs of toxic behaviors include constant criticism, emotional manipulation, verbal abuse, silent treatment, and controlling actions. They had all of these down to an art form, but they wrapped them in concern, in love, in wanting what's best for you. We only push you because we love you, my mother would say after a particularly brutal session. Other parents don't care enough to correct their children. You should be grateful. And for years, I was. I thanked them for their criticism. I apologized for my failures. I bent myself into increasingly impossible shapes trying to become what they wanted, never realizing that what they wanted was not my success, it was my submission. The lesson the grandfather mouse learned, that the cherry blossom scent means danger, was transmitted to its son and grandson. Just like those mice in the studies, I was inheriting more than just trauma, I was inheriting the very neural pathways of fear, the biological programming that told me I was never safe, never good enough, never truly family. The worst part? This wasn't unique to my generation. I'd seen the photographs, heard the stories whispered when they thought I wasn't listening. My mother's childhood in the 1970s, where Grandma Lily would make her kneel on rice for hours when she scored below 100%. My grandmother's youth in 1940s Shanghai, where her own mother would burn her belongings if she showed too much Western influence. Generation after generation, each mother and father convinced they were improving on their parents' methods, each one blind to the fact that they were simply refining the torture. My Uncle James, my mother's brother who'd moved to California and was only mentioned in hushed, angry tones, had tried to break free once. He'd sent me a letter on my 13th birthday, hidden inside a book about astronomy. Dear Sasha, it read, the stars you're looking at tonight burned out millions of years ago, but their light still reaches us. Sometimes families are like that too, still casting shadows from wounds that should have healed generations ago. Don't let their darkness convince you it's light. You deserve real sunshine. They found the letter before I could fully understand what he meant. The punishment lasted 3 days. They called it reorientation. I called it hell. Uncle James never wrote again, and I learned that even the attempt at escape came with a price too high to pay. By my 15th birthday, I had perfected the art of being invisible while in plain sight. I could predict their moods by the sound of their footsteps, adjust my breathing to avoid attracting attention, and had memorized exactly how to fold my father's newspaper so the crease would never trigger his rage about carelessness being a character flaw. But even perfection wasn't enough. Because the game was rigged, and the rules changed whenever I got too good at following them. The real purpose was never my improvement, it was my perpetual failure, my constant state of trying and never quite reaching, of apologizing and never quite being forgiven. I existed in a state of constant hypervigilance, what I later learned therapists call symptoms that are very similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, including intrusive thoughts and memories, nightmares, and hypervigilance. Every door opening could be the start of an interrogation. Every phone call could be someone reporting my behavior to my parents. Every family dinner was a minefield where one wrong word, one misconstrued expression, could detonate into hours of correction. And through it all, I compromised. I gave ground. I made myself smaller and quieter and less visible, hoping that if I took up less space, there would be less of me to hurt. I became an expert at reading the room, at diffusing tension, at redirecting anger away from myself and sometimes, to my eternal shame, toward others. Because that was another part of the system. We weren't just victims, we were trained to be perpetrators. When my younger cousin visited, I found myself repeating the same critical words, the same impossible standards. I caught myself and stopped, horrified, but the ease with which the cruelty came showed me how deeply the poison had spread. School became my refuge, but even that was tainted. My achievements there were claimed by my family as proof of their successful parenting, while my struggles were mine alone. I couldn't form real friendships because I knew any friend would eventually be used against me. Sarah's mother says you seemed sad at lunch. Are you telling people family business? Are you trying to embarrass us? War-related trauma has been documented to have longer-lasting effects on mental health and span through more generations. While we hadn't survived a war in the traditional sense, the Chin-Williams household was its own battlefield, and the casualties were measured in crushed dreams and broken spirits passed down like heirlooms. I learned to live in the spaces between their attention. The 30 minutes after school before anyone came home became my time to exist without performance. The walks to the library were my freedom, even though I knew I'd be questioned about every minute spent there. I developed entire worlds in my head where different versions of me lived different lives, all of them free. But the compromise refusal, the seed of my eventual rebellion, was already growing. It started as small acts of defiance so minor they couldn't be punished without seeming absurd. I would tie my shoes with the left one first instead of the right, as my father demanded. I would read books in the wrong order, starting with chapter 3, then 1, then 5, knowing they'd never check. I would smile genuinely at strangers when my family wasn't looking, little gifts of the warmth I wasn't allowed to show at home. These tiny rebellions kept me sane, reminded me that somewhere under all the compromise and submission, there was still a me that belonged to no one else. I didn't know then that these small acts of resistance were preparing me for the biggest refusal of my life. I didn't know that the universe, or perhaps Uncle James's stars, were aligning to offer me a way out. But first, I had to survive 3 more years. 3 more years of being the constant compromiser, the family shock absorber, the repository for generations of pain that had been refined and concentrated until it was strong enough to dissolve a person from the inside out. The morning of my 16th birthday, my mother woke me at 5 a.m. for what she called a life assessment. I sat at the kitchen table in my pajamas while she listed every disappointment I'd been since birth, starting with being born 3 days late and disrupting her schedule. My father added financial calculations, how much I'd cost them, how much more successful they could have been without the burden of a child. Grandma Lily just watched, her knitting needles clicking like a countdown to something I couldn't yet see. You have 2 more years to prove you were worth our investment, my mother concluded. 2 years to show us that 18 years of sacrifice weren't wasted. Don't disappoint us, Sasha. You know what happens to disappointments in this family. I did know. The photos of Uncle James had been removed from every album. His name had been erased from the family Bible. He had been disappeared as thoroughly as if he'd never existed. The message was clear: conform or cease to exist, at least as far as the Chin-Williams family was concerned. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that Uncle James had left me more than just a letter. He'd left me hope. And soon, very soon, I would discover he'd left me something else too. Something that would change everything. The revelation came on a humid Tuesday in August, 2 months after my 18th birthday. I was cleaning out the attic as punishment for suggesting we should eat dinner at 6:30 instead of 6 o'clock because I had a study group. Arbitrary rebellion, my mother had called it. The beginning of delinquency. Box after box of perfectly preserved family history surrounded me, photos of unsmiling ancestors, report cards from my mother's childhood, all A's, naturally, newspaper clippings of every family achievement for the past 60 years. It was while moving a particularly heavy box marked 1987 to 1990 that I found it, a manila envelope that had slipped between the floorboards, invisible unless you were looking from exactly the right angle. My name was written on it in Uncle James's handwriting. I should have left it. I should have reported it immediately to maintain my facade of perfect obedience. But 18 years of compromise had finally reached its limit. I took the envelope and hid it under my shirt, my heart pounding so loud I was certain they could hear it 2 floors down. That night, after everyone was asleep, I locked myself in the bathroom and opened it with shaking hands. Inside were 3 things that would change my life: a letter, a business card for a lawyer named David Steinberg, and a copy of a trust document with my name on it. The letter was dated on my 18th birthday, though written years earlier. Dearest Sasha. If you're reading this, you've survived to adulthood in that house, which makes you stronger than you know. I'm writing this knowing that by the time you receive it, I'll either be completely estranged from the family or dead, those being the only 2 ways to escape the Chin-Williams curse. I need you to know the truth about our family's wealth. Yes, your parents are successful, but the real money, the generational wealth, comes from your great-grandmother's brother, Chin Wei-lin. He escaped to America in 1949 with a fortune in gold and gems, fleeing the communist revolution. He built an empire in San Francisco, but he died without direct heirs. Here's what your grandmother never told anyone: Wei-lin hated her. He saw what she was, what she did to her children. In his will, he created a series of trusts designed to skip her generation entirely. The money would go to the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, but only if they could prove they had broken free from what he called the family poison. Your grandmother has spent 40 years trying to break these trusts, but Wei-lin was clever. He hired the best lawyers, created ironclad conditions. The trustee, David Steinberg's firm, has complete discretion over distribution, and they've been watching, waiting for one of us to break free. I received my distribution 10 years ago when I cut contact completely. It was $2.8 million. Yours, if you can prove your independence and break from the family's toxic patterns, is $3.3 million. It's been growing with interest. But here's the catch: you can't just leave. You have to prove psychological independence. You have to show the trustee that you've broken the cycle of abuse. And most importantly, you have to do it in a way that ensures you'll never go back. The business card in this envelope is for David. Call him when you're ready. He'll know who you are. He's been waiting for your call since you turned 18. I know you've been trained to compromise, to make yourself smaller, to accept the unacceptable. That training was their weapon against you. But your refusal to completely break, that's your power. That's what Uncle Wei-lin called the jade that bends but doesn't shatter. Don't let them know about this until you're ready. Plan carefully. Document everything. And remember, this isn't just about money. It's about breaking a chain that's held our family for generations. Your loving uncle, James. P.S. Your mother knows about the trust but thinks it's only accessible after your grandmother's death. She's wrong. Your grandmother has been lying to her for 40 years, claiming poverty while sitting on millions she can't access because she never broke free. The irony would be delicious if it weren't so tragic. I read the letter 17 times that night, memorizing every word before flushing it down the toilet in tiny pieces. The business card I hid inside the binding of my AP psychology textbook. The trust document I photographed with my phone before destroying it too. Generational trauma refers to psychological wounds passed down through family lines, often without conscious awareness. These wounds stem from traumatic events, ranging from war, oppression, and displacement to abuse, addiction, or grief within families. What's passed down isn't just history, but patterns of behavior, emotional responses, and sometimes even physical health issues. My family hadn't just inherited trauma, they'd inherited the very thing that could have freed them from it, but their inability to break the pattern meant the money remained forever out of reach. The cruel irony was perfect: the more they tried to control their children to be worthy of wealth, the more they ensured none of them would ever receive it. The next morning, I called David Steinberg from a payphone at the public library, my hands shaking as I dialed. Steinberg, Marsh and Associates, a professional voice answered. I need to speak with David Steinberg. My name is Sasha Chin-Williams. There was a pause. Miss Chin-Williams. We've been expecting your call. Please hold. The voice that came on next was warm but businesslike. Sasha, this is David Steinberg. I've been managing your great-great-uncle's trust for 32 years, waiting for this call. Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity and your situation. Can you come to my office? My family monitors everywhere I go. I understand. Let me ask you this: are you safe? Are you in immediate physical danger? I thought about the bruises hidden under my long sleeves, the hunger punishments, the sleep deprivation during correction sessions. Not immediate, I said finally. Okay. Here's what we're going to do. My firm has a satellite office in the Pittsford Library. I can meet you there under the pretense of a college scholarship interview. Can you manage that? Yes. Saturday, 2 p.m. Ask for the Morrison Scholarship Interview Room. And Sasha? Start documenting everything. Photos, recordings if you can manage it safely, journal entries with dates and times. We'll need evidence of the pattern of abuse to satisfy the trust's requirements. The week that followed was the longest of my life. I went through the motions of being the perfect, compromising daughter while secretly documenting every instance of abuse. I used my phone's voice recorder during family correction sessions, hiding it in my pocket. I photographed the bruises, the pages of written punishments, the food diary where my mother tracked every calorie I consumed as part of her health monitoring. Saturday came with agonizing slowness. I told my parents about the scholarship interview, and they were predictably pleased, more money for them to claim credit for earning through their excellent parenting. David Steinberg looked exactly like I'd imagined a trust lawyer would, silver-haired, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and an air of quiet authority. But what struck me most was how he looked at me, like I was a person, not a disappointment or an investment or a project to be fixed. "Sasha," he said, closing the door behind us. "I want you to know that everything we discuss here is confidential. Attorney-client privilege applies even though you're not paying me, the trust is." For the next 2 hours, I told him everything. Not just the recent abuse, but the entire pattern, generation by generation, as much as I knew. He listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, his expression growing increasingly grim. "Your Uncle James was one of the bravest people I've ever met," he said finally. "Breaking free from this level of systematic abuse takes incredible strength. The fact that you're here, that you've survived this long, tells me you have that same strength." He explained the trust in detail. Uncle Waylon had been a psychological pioneer of sorts, recognizing generational trauma decades before it became a studied phenomenon. He'd structured the trust not just to provide money, but to incentivize breaking the cycle. "The conditions are specific," David explained. "You need to demonstrate complete psychological and financial independence from the family, show evidence of seeking therapy or counseling to address the trauma, and most importantly, you must take actions that prevent the pattern from continuing to any future generation." "What kind of actions?" "That varies by case. Your Uncle James satisfied it by legally changing his name and getting a restraining order against your grandmother. Another cousin, you have a second cousin in Seattle you've never met, satisfied it by testifying in court about the family's tax fraud." "Tax fraud?" David smiled grimly. "Your family has many secrets, Sasha. The trust has been documenting them for 40 years. We have quite a file." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents I'd never seen, police reports from neighbors about screaming from our house that my parents had somehow made disappear, CPS visits that had been mysteriously closed without investigation, financial records showing discrepancies in my father's business dealings, and most shocking of all, a report from a private investigator showing my grandmother had been sued 3 times in China for child abuse before emigrating. "This is your ammunition," David said. "But use it wisely. The trust requires that you attempt to break free without destroying the family entirely." Uncle Waylon believed in justice, not revenge. "But if they force your hand, if they try to destroy you for leaving, then you have everything you need to protect yourself." "How long do I have?" "The trust is accessible until your 25th birthday. After that, if you haven't claimed it, it goes to charity." "But Sasha, I need you to understand something, this isn't just about the money. I've seen what happens to people who break free only for financial gain. They often get pulled back in. This is about saving your life, your future, your potential children from inheriting this poison." Epigenetics plays a crucial role in addressing generational trauma because it helps us understand how the effects of trauma can be passed down through generations and, most importantly, how we can intervene. The money was just a tool, the real inheritance was the chance to rewrite my family's biological and psychological destiny. I left that meeting with a plan. I would spend the next year documenting everything while preparing for my escape. I would apply to colleges far from Rochester, secure scholarships and financial aid to avoid any dependence on my parents, and most importantly, I would slowly, carefully stop compromising. The compromise refusal started small. When my mother demanded I drop my part-time tutoring job because it distracted from family obligations, I kept it, lying about my hours. When my father insisted I major in business or medicine, I secretly applied to psychology programs. When Grandma Lily wanted me to spend my weekends transcribing her memoirs, which were just lists of grievances against everyone who'd ever wronged her, I made copies for David instead. Each small refusal was terrifying. 18 years of training screamed at me to comply, to make peace, to smooth things over. The inability to take any kind of accountability is rooted in an attempt to displace and offload somebody's shame or bad feelings about themselves, so they don't have to apologize. But I was learning that my constant compromising hadn't been keeping the peace, it had been enabling their sickness. The documentation David had provided revealed something else crucial. I wasn't the only one with a secret. My mother had been having an affair with a colleague for 3 years. My father had been embezzling from his business partners. And Grandma Lily? She'd been slowly poisoning my grandfather for the last 2 years of his life, not enough to kill him quickly, just enough to keep him weak and dependent. The toxicology report from his autopsy, which had been sealed, showed elevated levels of mercury that the medical examiner had questions about but never pursued. These weren't just flawed people doing their best. These were criminals hiding behind the facade of family respectability. And I had been their perfect victim, trained from birth to never question, never resist, never tell. But the trust money wasn't just sitting idle. David explained that part of it had been invested in a team of professionals who'd been monitoring my family for years, building a case, waiting for one of the children to be ready to hear the truth. "We have a therapist ready for you," he said during our third secret meeting. "Someone who specializes in family trauma and cult deprogramming." Cult? What else would you call a closed system that uses thought control, punishment for questioning authority, isolation from outside influences, and generates complete dependence on the group? Your family isn't just toxic, Sasha. It's a cult with only 4 members, and you're the designated sacrifice. The therapy sessions, conducted online under the guise of SAT prep, were revelatory. Dr. Kim taught me about trauma bonding, about learned helplessness, about the way abusers create dependent relationships that feel impossible to leave. Your compromise refusal is actually a superpower, she told me. Most people in your situation either completely comply or completely rebel in ways that get them expelled from the family before they're ready. You found a third way, strategic resistance. You're playing a long game, and that takes incredible strength and intelligence. She taught me techniques for maintaining my sanity while living in the toxic environment. Grounding exercises for when the gaslighting got too intense. Mantras to repeat when they tried to convince me I was worthless. Ways to secretly record conversations that would hold up in court if needed. But most importantly, she taught me that none of this was my fault. The toxicity can be reversed with therapy, self-love, setting boundaries, establishing positive relationships, and self-help groups. I was not broken. I was not worthless. I was a survivor of systematic, generational abuse, and my survival itself was an act of rebellion. As autumn turned to winter, I could feel the tension in the house shifting. My parents couldn't put their finger on what was different, but they sensed something had changed. I was still performing my role, but something in my eyes had shifted. The complete submission they required was gone, replaced by something they couldn't quite name. "You've been different lately," my mother observed one evening, her clinical gaze dissecting me. "More self-contained." "I'm just focused on college applications," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't believe me, but she couldn't find the lie. My father started checking my room more frequently, going through my belongings with increasing paranoia. Grandma Lily began telling stories about children who betrayed their families, always ending with their terrible fates. The pressure was building, and I knew something had to give. It was December when I made a crucial mistake. I'd been recording a particularly brutal session where they were berating me for getting a 98 on my calculus final instead of 100, when my phone slipped from my pocket. The recording app was visible for just a moment before I grabbed it, but my mother's eyes had caught the screen. "What was that?" "Nothing. Just my phone." "Show me." This was it. The moment where compromise would mean surrendering my evidence, my connection to David and Dr. Kim, my hope of escape. For 18 years, I would have handed it over immediately, apologizing for having it out in the first place. But something in me, maybe Uncle Wayland's jade that bends but doesn't shatter, refused. "No," I said quietly. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. My mother's face went through a series of expressions, shock, rage, then something almost like fear. "What did you say?" I said no. "My phone is private." "Nothing in this house is private. You live under our roof, eating our food, spending our money. Everything you have belongs to us." "No," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "It doesn't." My father stood up, his physical presence meant to intimidate. "Give your mother the phone, Sasha. Now." "No." What followed was the worst punishment session of my life. They didn't hit me, they were too smart for that, too aware of leaving evidence. But the psychological torture they unleashed was masterful in its cruelty. They dismantled every moment of my existence, every breath I'd taken, every dollar spent on my survival, turning it all into evidence of my fundamental wrongness. But something had broken in me, or perhaps something had finally been fixed. Each cruel word bounced off the shield Dr. Kim had helped me build. I am not what they say I am. I am not worthless. I am breaking free. They kept me up for 36 hours, trying to break me through sleep deprivation. They withheld food. They made me stand in stress positions. But I didn't give them the phone. It was my first real victory, and even though I paid for it in pain, it was worth it. Because I had learned something crucial, they were afraid of me. For the first time in my life, they were the ones scrambling for control. My refusal to compromise had shifted the power dynamic in a way they didn't know how to handle. And the phone? I'd uploaded everything to the cloud and factory reset it before the confrontation even ended. When they finally wrestled it from me and broke into it, they found nothing but factory-installed apps and a wallpaper of a sunset. The look on my mother's face when she realized I'd outsmarted them was worth every second of pain. Because in that moment, I saw the truth, she wasn't an all-powerful authority figure. She was just a broken woman perpetuating the abuse she'd received, and I was going to be the one to break the cycle. Spring arrived in Rochester with its usual reluctance, and with it came the letter that would change everything. I'd been accepted to the University of Washington's psychology program with a full scholarship, one my parents knew nothing about because I'd applied using my school counselor's address. But that wasn't the breaking point. No, that came 2 weeks later at the Chin Williams annual charity gala, the social event where my family displayed their success to Rochester's elite, where I was meant to be the crown jewel in their performance of perfect family harmony. The Riverside Country Club had been transformed into what my mother called understated elegance, white orchids on every table, string quartet playing softly, and 119 of Rochester's most influential families gathered to celebrate our family's generous donation to the Children's Hospital. The irony of child abusers donating to help children wasn't lost on me. I wore the dress my mother had selected, a conservative navy blue that she said didn't draw inappropriate attention, and stood where I was told, smiled when expected, and recited my rehearsed responses about my college plans, pre-med at the University of Rochester, staying close to family, grateful for their support and guidance. Everything was going according to their script until Harrison Blackwood approached our table. Harrison was old Rochester money, the kind of family that had streets named after them. More importantly, his nephew was a lawyer at Steinberg, Marsh, and Associates, something my family didn't know. "Sasha," he said warmly, taking my hand. "David Steinberg speaks very highly of you. He says you're one of the most remarkable young women he's ever met." The silence at our table was deafening. My mother's smile froze. My father's champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. Grandma Lily's eyes narrowed to slits. "I'm sorry," my mother said, her voice honeyed poison. "How does our daughter know David Steinberg?" Harrison, bless him, seemed to realize he'd stepped into something. But rather than backing down, he doubled down. "Oh, from the Wayland Trust, of course. David's been managing it for decades. Sasha's one of the beneficiaries, isn't she? Brilliant of old Wayland to structure it the way he did. Ensuring the money goes only to those who break free from toxic family patterns? Visionary, really." The sound of my grandmother's champagne glass shattering was the only noise in our corner of the ballroom. Blood seeped from her hand where she'd gripped it too tightly, but she didn't seem to notice. Her eyes were fixed on me with a hatred so pure it could have frozen hell. "Excuse us," my father said stiffly. "Family emergency." But Harrison wasn't done. Maybe he knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe David had sent him. Or maybe he just enjoyed chaos. "Oh, no emergency, I hope? Sasha, David wanted me to tell you that all your documentation has been received and approved. The full amount will be available on your 19th birthday. All $3.3 million of it. Here are some more toxic relationship patterns and signs. You are always engulfed by a bad feeling. Keeping a scorecard. You bury your feelings and opinions. An apparent lack of effort from your partner. Verbal or physical abuse. Passive-aggressive behavior. Lack of healthy boundaries. Constant insecurity, jealousy, and lies. Every single one of these patterns exploded in that moment. The scorecard of everything they'd done for me was about to be weaponized. The boundaries I'd started to establish were about to be demolished. And the verbal abuse? It was about to reach levels I'd never experienced. We're leaving, my mother hissed, her fingers digging into my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Now. Actually, I said, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet section of the ballroom, I'm not. Sasha. My father's voice held a warning that would have once terrified me into compliance. No. I pulled my arm free from my mother's grip. I'm done. I'm done being your puppet. I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done compromising myself into nothing. You ungrateful, my grandmother started, but I cut her off. Ungrateful? I laughed, and it felt like 18 years of suppressed emotion breaking free. For what should I be grateful? The constant criticism? The sleep deprivation? The hunger punishments? The bruises? Or maybe I should be grateful for the mercury you'd been putting in my food, just like you did to Grandpa? The gasp from the crowd was audible. People were recording on their phones. Good. Let them. You don't know what you're talking about, my grandmother said, but her voice shook. Don't I? I pulled out my phone, my new one, the one they didn't know about. Should I play the recording of you explaining to Mom how just a little mercury keeps them weak and manageable? Or maybe the one where Dad discusses his embezzlement with his mistress? Oh, did you not know about the mistress, Mom? The one at your hospital? Dr. Patricia Reeves? My mother's face went white. My father stepped toward me, but Harrison Blackwood stepped between us. I wouldn't, Harrison said quietly. Not with all these witnesses. You've destroyed us, my mother whispered. You've destroyed everything we built. No, I said, and for the first time in my life, I felt powerful. You destroyed it. Generation after generation of abuse, of trauma, of poison passed down like a family heirloom. I'm just the first one strong enough to say no more. Collective trauma is when psychological trauma experienced by communities and identity groups is carried on as part of the group's collective memory and shared sense of identity. But our collective trauma ended with me. You're nothing without us, my father said. You think that money will save you? You don't know how to survive in the real world. Maybe not, I admitted. But I'd rather fail on my own than succeed as your slave. I turned to address the room, all these people who'd watched our family's performance for years, who'd suspected something was wrong but never intervened. The Chin Williams family would like you to believe they're pillars of this community, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. But they're abusers. Child abusers. For generations, they've tortured their children into submission, calling it love, calling it discipline, calling it tradition. And you all knew something was wrong. You saw a child who flinched at unexpected movements, who never had friends over, who performed perfection like her life depended on it, because it did. And you did nothing. Stop, my grandmother commanded, struggling to her feet, blood still dripping from her hand. Stop this immediately. No. The word felt like freedom. I'm done stopping. I'm done being silent. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of your actions. I looked at my parents one last time. Despite everything, there was still a part of me, the part that every abused child carries, that hoped to see something human in their eyes. Some recognition of what they'd done. Some spark of remorse. But there was nothing. Just rage and calculation, already planning how to spin this, how to regain control, how to punish me for this ultimate betrayal. I'm leaving, I announced. I'm leaving this family, this city, this entire toxic legacy. And I'm never coming back. You'll be back, my mother said coldly. When you fail, when you realize what you've thrown away, you'll come crawling back. Even if I ended up homeless under a bridge, I said, it would still be better than one more day in your house. I walked out of that ballroom with nothing but my phone and the clothes on my back. But I felt lighter than I'd ever felt in my life. Behind me, I could hear the explosion of voices, my family trying to do damage control, the guests gossiping, someone calling for security. David Steinberg was waiting in the parking lot with a car. That was quite the exit, he said, opening the door for me. I didn't plan it, I admitted, suddenly shaking as the adrenaline wore off. The best rebellions rarely are. Come on. Let's get you somewhere safe. As we drove away from the country club, away from 18 years of hell, I got a text from an unknown number. It was a video link. Someone had live-streamed my confrontation with my family. It already had 50,000 views. By morning, it would have 40 million. The safe house David had arranged was a modest apartment in Buffalo, an hour from Rochester but worlds away from the Chin Williams sphere of influence. For the first week, I did nothing but sleep and cry, 18 years of suppressed emotions pouring out in waves that left me exhausted and hollow. Dr. Kim visited daily, helping me process what she called the trauma exodus. When someone leaves an abusive situation, she explained, especially one that's been their entire world, there's often a period of psychological free fall. Everything you've used to survive, the hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the constant compromise, suddenly has nowhere to go. She was right. I found myself jumping at every sound, apologizing to the furniture when I bumped into it, asking permission to eat the food David had stocked in my refrigerator. 18 years of programming didn't disappear just because I'd walked out of a ballroom. But while I was falling apart and rebuilding, something else was happening. The video of my confrontation had gone beyond viral. #BreakTheCurse was trending globally. Thousands of people were sharing their own stories of family abuse, of generational trauma, of the courage it took to say no more. More importantly, investigators had taken interest in my accusations. The mercury poisoning claim had triggered a police investigation. The embezzlement mention had the IRS knocking on my father's door. And my mother's hospital had launched an internal investigation into her affair with Dr. Reeves, which violated their ethics policies. But I wasn't satisfied with just escape. I wanted more than freedom, I wanted justice. Not revenge in the petty sense, but the kind of justice that would ensure they could never do this to anyone else again. The trust requires you to prevent the pattern from continuing, David reminded me during one of our strategy sessions. That doesn't mean destroying them, but it does mean ensuring they can't perpetuate the abuse. The plan came together slowly, carefully, with the precision my family had taught me to apply to everything, only now, I was applying it to their downfall. Phase 1, Documentation. I had 18 years of evidence, but it was scattered, some of it only in my memory. Dr. Kim helped me create a comprehensive timeline of abuse, complete with medical records, obtained through David's legal channels, showing patterns of accidents and illnesses that coincided with punishment periods. We found 17 ER visits for clumsiness between ages 7 and 15. School attendance records showing mysterious absences after family events. Photos from social media where careful observers could see bruises hidden under makeup. Teacher reports of concerning behavior that were never followed up on. But the real goldmine came from an unexpected source, Uncle James. He reached out through David, offering his own documentation from his childhood and teenage years. He had recordings from the 1990s, photos of injuries, journal entries that showed the pattern went back decades. He also had something extraordinary, a recording of my grandmother admitting to poisoning her own mother back in China. She was proud of it, James told me over a secure video call. Said it was the moment she learned that power came from making others weak. She taught that philosophy to your mother, who refined it with her psychiatric training. Phase 2, Legal Preparation. David connected me with a team of lawyers who specialized in family abuse cases. They were building multiple cases. 1. Criminal charges for child abuse, assault, and attempted poisoning. 2. Civil suits for emotional distress and financial abuse. They'd stolen money from my college fund and savings bonds relatives had given me. 3. Professional complaints against my mother's medical license and my father's business licenses. We're not just going after them for what they did to you, the lead attorney, Sarah Martinez, explained. We're establishing a pattern of behavior that goes back generations. This is about protecting future victims. The Social Services Division provides matching dollars for mental health agencies/services that are primarily funded by the Circuit 4, Department of Children and Families, DCF, Substance Abuse and Mental Health, SAMH, Program Office. DCF is designated as the Mental Health Authority of Florida. We were working with these agencies to ensure my family would be flagged in any system where they might have access to vulnerable people. Phase 3, Financial Warfare. My father's businesses were built on reputation and connections. My mother's practice depended on her standing in the medical community. My grandmother's remaining influence came from her position as a respected elder in the Chinese American community. I gave interviews to journalists who were investigating the story. Not sensationalist tell-alls, but serious investigations into how generational trauma operates in successful families, how abusers hide behind respectability. The New York Times ran a piece called The Inheritance of Trauma, How One Family's Curse Went Viral. The Washington Post followed with Mercury and Manipulation, the Chin Williams dynasty unravels. Each article was carefully fact-checked, legally vetted, and impossible to dismiss as the ravings of a bitter child. My father's business partners began pulling out. My mother's patients started canceling appointments. My grandmother was disinvited from the cultural committees she'd dominated for decades. But the real blow came when I released the recordings. Phase 4, the recordings. I had hundreds of hours of audio. Dr. Kim helped me edit them down to the most damning clips, not just the abuse, but the admissions of guilt, the planning of punishments, the casual discussions of how to break me without leaving evidence. One recording in particular became infamous. It was from a family meeting where they discussed my future. Mother, she's too independent lately. We need to break that before college. Father, financial control should do it. Cut off everything, make her beg. Grandmother, in my day, we had better methods. Physical correction leaves an impression. Mother, too risky now. But psychological pressure, properly applied. She'll break. They always do. Father, what if she doesn't? Grandmother, then she's not family. We erase her like we did James. Mother, she won't last a week without us. She's too well trained to survive alone. The recording ended with them laughing about how I'd probably apologize within days of any attempt to leave. When I released it, along with dozens of others, the public response was immediate and overwhelming. #they always do became a rallying cry for abuse survivors. My mother's claim that I was too well trained to survive alone became a meme, with thousands of survivors posting their achievements after leaving abusive families. Phase 5, the sting. But I wanted them to feel what I'd felt, the helplessness, the knowledge that no matter what you did, you couldn't win. So I set a trap. Through David's connections, I arranged for a fake reconciliation meeting to be offered through a mediator. The message was that I was struggling, that the money wouldn't be released unless I showed good faith effort to repair the family relationship. They jumped at it, smelling weakness. The meeting was set for a neutral location, a conference room at a law firm in Syracuse. They arrived dressed for victory, my mother in her power suit, my father in his most expensive watch, my grandmother in the traditional Chinese dress she wore when she wanted to project cultural authority. I wasn't there. Instead, they found Sarah Martinez and a team of prosecutors. The FBI was there too. The embezzlement my father had been involved in crossed state lines, making it a federal case. The IRS had representatives present. Adult Protective Services was there about the elder abuse allegations regarding my grandfather. But the best part was the screen showing a live feed of me at the University of Washington, attending my first psychology lecture. The timestamp showed I'd never intended to come to the meeting. "This is entrapment," my father shouted. "No," Sarah said calmly. "This is consequence. Sasha Chin Williams sends her regards and wants you to know that she's thriving without you. Every day she succeeds is proof that you were wrong about her. Every happiness she experiences is a victory over what you tried to make her believe about herself." They were arrested that day. All three of them, let out in handcuffs while photographers, tipped off by an anonymous source, captured every moment. The headlines wrote themselves: "Family who claimed daughter couldn't survive without them arrested while she attends first college class 3,000 miles away." The trials began in October, just as the leaves in Rochester turned the same shade of red as the dress I wore to testify. I'd chosen it specifically. In Chinese culture, red symbolizes luck and prosperity, but to me, it symbolized rebirth. The girl who'd been forbidden from wearing attention-seeking colors was gone. In her place stood a woman who refused to be invisible. The courtroom was packed. Media, victims' advocates, and other survivors of family abuse filled every seat. My family sat at the defendant's table, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. Without their house, their wealth, their carefully constructed facade of respectability, they were just three bitter people facing the consequences of their choices. My testimony took 3 days. I spoke about every punishment, every humiliation, every moment of terror. But more importantly, I spoke about the system, how generational trauma had been weaponized, refined, and passed down like a poisoned inheritance. My grandmother learned from her mother that love was control, I said, looking directly at her. My mother learned from her that children were experiments in psychological manipulation. My father learned that financial domination was the ultimate power. And they tried to teach me that I was nothing without them. But they were wrong. Because what they actually taught me was how to survive anything. How to find strength in the smallest rebellions. How to build hope from scraps of kindness from strangers. They created a survivor, and now that survivor is ensuring they never hurt anyone again. Rachel Yehuda, director of the Traumatic Stress Studies Division at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City, conducted a 2015 study on the children of 40 Holocaust survivors. She found that they had epigenetic changes to a gene linked to their levels of cortisol, a hormone involved in the stress response. She also found a distinctive pattern of DNA methylation, another epigenetic marker. The study concluded that both parents and unborn children were affected on a genetic level. I submitted this research as evidence that my family's abuse wasn't just harmful to me, it was potentially altering the genetic expression of future generations. The trauma they inflicted was literally rewriting DNA, ensuring that their poison would continue even after they were gone. My mother tried to use her psychiatric training to defend herself, claiming I was suffering from false memory syndrome, that I'd been influenced by the media attention. But the recordings destroyed that defense. Her own voice, discussing how to break me, how to keep me manageable, how to ensure I never developed independence. The prosecution also brought in expert witnesses. Dr. Patricia Reeves, my mother's former lover, testified in exchange for immunity. She revealed that my mother had bragged about her experiments in control, had shared techniques for psychological manipulation that she used on both patients and family. She said Sasha was her greatest success, Dr. Reeves testified. That she'd created the perfect victim, someone who would never leave, never fight back, never even realize they were being abused. She was wrong. My father's business partners testified about his financial crimes, but also about comments he'd made about me. How he'd referred to me as an investment that needed to pay dividends. How he'd calculated my worth in dollars and found me lacking. But it was my grandmother's trial that drew the most attention. The mercury poisoning charges were severe, but the investigation had uncovered more. Much more. Through international cooperation with Chinese authorities, they discovered that my grandmother had been investigated for similar crimes in Shanghai before emigrating. 3 children in her neighborhood had suffered mysterious illnesses after eating food she'd prepared. 1 had died. The cases had been closed due to lack of evidence and a timely bribe to local officials. She'd been poisoning people for 60 years, refining her techniques, teaching them to my mother. The mercury in my food hadn't been meant to kill me, it was meant to keep me weak, confused, dependent. Just enough to impair cognitive function, to make me doubt my own perceptions, to ensure I'd never be strong enough to leave. During her testimony, my grandmother finally showed her true face. The mask of the respectable elder dropped, and what emerged was pure malevolence. "You ungrateful child," she spat at me from the witness stand. "Everything I did was to make you strong. To prepare you for a world that would destroy the weak. You think you've won? You've destroyed a dynasty. You've spit on your ancestors." "My ancestors," I replied calmly, "would be ashamed of what you've become." Uncle Waylon saw it. That's why he made sure his money would never touch your hands. He knew you were poison, and he created the antidote, a way for your victims to escape. The verdict came down on Halloween, appropriately enough. The day when masks come off and true faces are revealed. My mother, guilty of child abuse, practicing medicine unethically, and conspiracy to commit poisoning. 15 years in prison, medical license permanently revoked. My father, guilty of embezzlement, tax fraud, child abuse, and financial exploitation of a minor. 12 years in prison, all assets seized. My grandmother, guilty of attempted murder, serial poisoning, child abuse spanning decades. Life in prison without possibility of parole. As they were led away, each of them looked at me. My mother with cold fury, my father with calculating rage, my grandmother with something that might have been respect if it hadn't been twisted by hatred. None of them apologized. None of them showed remorse. They went to their cells still convinced they were the victims, that I was the villain who destroyed their perfect family. But the real execution of my revenge wasn't their imprisonment. It was what happened next. The viral nature of my story had created something unexpected, a movement. #BreakTheCurse had evolved from a hashtag into an organization. Survivors of generational trauma were coming forward, sharing their stories, supporting each other. But for my family, the fallout was complete annihilation of everything they'd valued. The social destruction. Rochester society, which had embraced the Chin Williams family for decades, turned on them completely. Every charity they'd supported returned their donations. Every social club revoked their memberships. The country club where I'd had my confrontation banned them for life before the trials even began. Their friends, such as they were, disappeared overnight. These relationships had been built on the image of success and respectability. Without that image, there was nothing left. My mother's colleagues at the hospital released a statement distancing themselves from her methods. Several former patients came forward with complaints about her therapeutic techniques that bordered on abuse. The psychological community published papers about the danger of therapists who use their training to manipulate rather than heal. My father's business empire collapsed within weeks. His partner sued him for the embezzlement. His dealerships were seized. His reputation in the business community was so thoroughly destroyed that even his lawyer dropped him, citing irreconcilable differences in ethical standards. My grandmother's position in the Chinese American community evaporated. The cultural organizations she'd led for decades not only expelled her but issued public apologies for having given her a platform. Stories emerged from other families, subtle threats, manipulation, poisonous advice she'd given to young mothers about how to properly discipline their children. The financial devastation. The lawsuits were comprehensive. Beyond the criminal fines, the civil suits destroyed any remaining wealth. I wasn't the only one suing. Uncle James filed for damages for his childhood abuse. 2 of my father's former employees sued for workplace harassment. 3 of my mother's patients sued for malpractice. The house in Pittsford, their temple to success, was seized to pay legal fees. The cars, the jewelry, the art collection, all gone. The hidden offshore accounts my father thought no one knew about were frozen by federal investigators. But the cruelest blow was when they learned the full truth about Uncle Wayland's trust. There wasn't just my $3.3 million. There were trusts for every grandchild and great-grandchild, all with the same conditions. All requiring proof of breaking free from the family poison. My grandmother had been sitting on the knowledge of nearly $20 million in trusts, lying to her children about poverty while ensuring none of them would ever be healthy enough to claim their inheritance. She'd literally made them too broken to be rich. The media explosion. The documentary came out 6 months after the trials. The Curse of the Chin Williams Family aired on Netflix and became their most-watched documentary of the year. It featured interviews with teachers who'd suspected abuse, neighbors who'd heard screams, family friends who'd noticed the fear in my eyes but done nothing. But it also featured the survivors. Uncle James spoke publicly for the first time about his escape. My second cousin from Seattle revealed her story. Others came forward, distant relatives who'd cut contact, family friends who'd been driven away for asking too many questions. The documentary revealed the full scope of the generational trauma. My great-grandmother's abuse in Shanghai. My grandmother's reign of terror. My mother's clinical approach to psychological torture. It traced the poison through generations, showing how each iteration became more sophisticated, more cruel, more effective at creating victims. My family, watching from their prison cells, had to see their entire legacy reframed. They weren't successful immigrants who'd achieved the American dream. They were serial abusers whose wealth and status had been built on the broken spirits of their children. The personal fallout. Letters came to me from my family in prison. I read them with Dr. Kim, processing each one. My mother's letters were psychological warfare disguised as concern. I worry about your mental state, she wrote. This need for attention, this fabrication of abuse, these are signs of serious personality disorders. I could help you if you'd let me. My father's letters were financial negotiations. The money won't last forever. You need my business expertise. We could work together when I get out. I could teach you everything I know. My grandmother's letters were in Mandarin, filled with curses and prophecies of doom. She claimed I'd cursed myself, that the ancestors would punish me, that I'd die alone and unloved. I responded to each of them once, with the same message. I am thriving without you. I am in therapy, healing from what you did to me. I have friends who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I wake up without fear. I go to sleep without terror. I eat without wondering if my food is poisoned. I speak without calculating every word. I exist without apology. Your biggest fear has come true, I don't need you. I never did. The response was predictable. More letters, escalating in tone, alternating between rage and fake remorse. I stopped reading them, forwarding them instead to my legal team in case they contained threats. The unexpected allies. But for every piece of hate mail from my family's few remaining supporters, there were hundreds of letters from survivors. They shared their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. Some had escaped, others were still trapped. Many were just beginning to recognize their abuse as abuse. I heard from other children of successful families, kids who lived in beautiful houses with educated parents who tortured them behind closed doors. The successful lawyer who locked his son in closets. The respected teacher who starved her daughter for minor infractions. The beloved community leader who had driven 3 children to suicide attempts with his discipline. A support group formed organically. We met online at first, then in person. There was something powerful about being in a room with people who understood. Who knew what it was like to have your abuse dismissed because your parents were pillars of the community? Who understood the particular mindfuck of being told you should be grateful for your abuse because it came with material comfort? One member, Sarah, had escaped from a family remarkably similar to mine. They always said I'd end up homeless without them, she told the group. I did end up homeless for 6 months. And those 6 months under a bridge were still better than 18 years in their mansion. The victory. The real victory wasn't the money, though the $3.3 million certainly helped. It wasn't even the justice, though seeing them in orange jumpsuits was satisfying. The real victory was smaller, quieter, more personal. It was waking up without fear for the first time in my life. It was eating a meal without wondering if it was poisoned. It was making a mistake, burning toast, missing a bus, getting a B on an exam, and not spending hours crafting an apology. It was wearing red because I liked it, not because it was approved. It was having friends who knew nothing about my family's former status and liked me anyway. It was going to therapy and slowly, carefully, learning who I was when I wasn't trying to survive. Help speeds healing. Seeking professional support is essential. Therapy, support groups, and hotlines play a crucial role in recovery by shortening recovery time and lowering relapse risk. Dr. Kim had been right. The therapy, the support groups, the connections with other survivors, they were rebuilding me from the ground up. 2 years have passed since that night at the country club. 2 years since I spoke my truth to 119 witnesses and 40 million online viewers. 2 years since I broke the curse that had plagued my family for generations. I'm 21 now, finishing my junior year at the University of Washington. My major is psychology with a focus on family trauma and recovery. My thesis advisor says my work on generational trauma patterns could be groundbreaking. I sometimes want to laugh at the irony. My family created their own worst enemy, someone who understands their techniques intimately and is determined to help others escape similar situations. The money from Uncle Wayland's trust hasn't just changed my life, it's changing others' lives too. I used part of it to establish the Breaking the Curse Foundation, which provides emergency funds, legal assistance, and safe housing for people escaping abusive families. We've helped 847 people so far, with more reaching out every day. I live in a small apartment near campus. It's nothing fancy, certainly nothing like the house in Pittsford with its perfect lawn and hidden horrors. But it's mine. Every piece of furniture I chose. Every picture on the wall has a happy memory attached. The locks on the doors keep danger out instead of keeping me in. My chosen family is small but fierce. There's Marcus, yes, same name as my father, which we both find therapeutically hilarious, who escaped his own toxic family and understands why I sometimes need to check that the doors are locked 3 times before bed. There's Anna, my roommate, who leaves supportive sticky notes on my mirror when she knows I'm having a hard day. There's Dr. Kim, who's become more than a therapist, she's become a mentor and friend. Uncle James and I meet for coffee once a month over video chat. He lives in Portland now, married with 2 kids who've never met their grandparents and never will. The cycle stops with us, he tells me every time we talk. His children are growing up believing they're worthy of love just for existing, not for what they achieve. Revolutionary concept in our family. I'm in love. Her name is Quinn, and she's nothing like what my family would have chosen for me, which makes her perfect. She's an art major who paints abstracts that make no logical sense and make me feel everything. She has tattoos that would have given my grandmother a stroke and a laugh that sounds like freedom. She knows my whole story and loves me not despite it but because surviving it made me who I am. The first time she met my chosen family, she said, "You built something beautiful from the ashes." She was right. I had. The ongoing healing. Healing isn't linear. There are still days when I hear my mother's voice in my head, telling me I'm not good enough. Days when I catch myself apologizing for existing. Days when I check my food for signs of tampering even though I know I'm safe. Acknowledging the trauma and symptoms of intergenerational trauma can be tricky, but with the right approach, your family can begin the healing process. For you, the parent, you must first realize you aren't broken. You're a cycle breaker for your family and future generations. I'm not a parent yet, but I think about it. About what kind of mother I'll be. About how I'll handle discipline, affection, disappointment. I've made a list of promises to my future children. 1. You will never earn my love. You have it just for existing. 2. Your failures are opportunities to learn, not character flaws. 3. Your body is yours. Your thoughts are yours. Your dreams are yours. 4. I will apologize when I'm wrong and mean it. 5. Home will be your safe place, not your battlefield. 6. You can tell me anything without fear of punishment. 7. Your achievements belong to you. Your struggles are ours to share. 8. You will know every day that you are enough, exactly as you are. Sometimes I wonder what my children's DNA will carry. Will the epigenetic markers of trauma my family carved into my genes affect them? Science says maybe. But science also says that love, safety, and secure attachment can rewrite those markers. That healing can be inherited too. The letter. Last month, I received a letter forwarded by my lawyer. It was from my mother, different from the others. The prison psychiatrist had apparently made her participate in a program for inmates with personality disorders. The letter was part of her treatment. Sasha. I am required to write this letter as part of my therapeutic process. I am supposed to acknowledge the harm I caused you. The therapist says I subjected you to systematic emotional and psychological abuse. That I used my psychiatric training to manipulate and control you. That I perpetuated generational trauma. I still believe I was preparing you for a harsh world. But I can acknowledge that my methods were extreme. That perhaps my own childhood experiences influenced my parenting in negative ways. I do not expect forgiveness. Dr. Elena Chen, number 1847329. Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was the closest thing to acknowledgement I'd ever get from her. I showed it to Dr. Kim during our session. How do you feel about it? She asked. Empty, I said after thinking. Like. I spent so many years wanting them to see what they did to me. Wanting them to acknowledge it. And now that she sort of has, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give me back my childhood. No, Dr. Kim agreed. It doesn't. But you've given yourself something more powerful than their acknowledgement. You've given yourself freedom. The public speaking. I never intended to become a public speaker, but the invitations kept coming. Universities, survivor organizations, medical conferences. They wanted to hear about breaking generational trauma from someone who'd lived it. My most requested speech is called The Jade That Bends But Doesn't Shatter. I talk about Uncle Waylon's metaphor, about how flexibility isn't weakness but strength. About how bending under pressure isn't the same as breaking. About how sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to become what tried to destroy you. Last week, I spoke at Harvard Medical School to a room full of future psychiatrists. I looked at their eager faces and wondered if any of them would become like my mother, using their knowledge as a weapon. But I also saw the ones taking careful notes when I talked about the signs of abuse, the ones who asked how they could help patients escape toxic families. The ability to apologize, to own your stuff, is a hallmark sign of a healthy family system, I told them, quoting the research. If you have patients whose families never apologize, never take accountability, always deflect blame, look closer. There's always more to the story. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She was crying. My mother is a doctor, she whispered. She does what your mother did. Uses psychology too. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was imagining it. I gave her David Steinberg's card. You're not crazy. You're not imagining it. And you don't have to stay. She's the 848th person the foundation has helped. She won't be the last. The anniversary. Today marks exactly 2 years since the country club confrontation. Quinn suggested we celebrate your Independence Day, she called it. But I wanted to do something different. I drove to Rochester. Not to the old house, that belongs to another family now, one that hopefully fills it with genuine love. Not to the country club, I have no desire to relive that night. I went to the cemetery where my grandfather is buried. I'd never been allowed to visit his grave when he was first buried. My grandmother said it would upset me unnecessarily. Now I know she was afraid of what I might sense there, what truth might whisper from the earth. His headstone is simple: Marcus Chen, beloved husband and father. The dates. Nothing more. I sat beside his grave and told him everything. About the Mercury. About the trials. About grandmother spending her remaining years in a cell. About the curse being broken. I don't know if you can hear me, I said to the cold stone. I don't know if you were a victim or a perpetrator or both. But the poison stops with me. Your great-grandchildren, if I have them, will never know that kind of fear. As I stood to leave, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Someone had been leaving flowers. Fresh orchids, replaced regularly. White ones, the color of mourning in Chinese culture. The groundskeeper told me they'd been coming for 2 years. Asian gentleman, about 50. Never says anything. Just leaves the flowers and goes. Uncle James, when I called him, admitted it was him. He was my father too, he said simply. Despite everything, or maybe because of it. We honor the dead not for who they were, but for who they could have been if the poison hadn't touched them. The unexpected visitor. Last month, I had a visitor I never expected. Harrison Blackwood, the man whose perfectly timed revelation had started the avalanche, requested a meeting. I owe you an explanation, he said over coffee. That night at the country club, it wasn't an accident. I'd suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed was still surprising. David Steinberg is my brother-in-law, he explained. He'd been watching your family for years, waiting for the right moment. When he heard about the gala, about how they were planning to parade you around one last time, he asked me to intervene. Why? I asked. Because 40 years ago, I was you. Different family, same poison. My father was a prominent judge who used his power to terrorize his children. David helped me escape, helped me claim my own inheritance from a great-aunt who'd set up a similar trust. I've been paying it forward ever since. He showed me a photo of his family, his husband, their 2 adopted daughters, all of them laughing at a beach somewhere. This is what's possible, he said. When you break free, you don't just save yourself. You save every generation that comes after. The documentary update. Netflix wanted to do a follow-up documentary. 2 years later, the Chin Williams curse update. They offered substantial money, promises of complete editorial control, the chance to tell my story my way. I declined. My story has been told. It's out there, helping people, starting conversations, breaking cycles. But I don't want to be frozen in that moment forever. I don't want to be defined solely by what I survived. Instead, I'm working on something different. A book, but not a memoir. A practical guide for recognizing and escaping generational trauma. Each chapter pairs survivor stories with psychological research and practical resources. Dr. Kim is co-authoring, bringing her clinical expertise to balance my lived experience. The working title is Breaking the Curse, A Survivor's Guide to Ending Generational Trauma. The dedication reads, to Uncle James, who showed me the door. To David Steinberg, who helped me walk through it. To everyone still trapped, the door exists. Keep looking. The final confrontation. 6 weeks ago, I got a call I'd been dreading. My grandmother had suffered a stroke in prison. She was dying and had requested to see me. Every part of me screamed no. Dr. Kim said the choice was mine alone. Quinn said she'd support whatever I decided. Uncle James said I owed her nothing. But I went. Not for her. For me. To see if I could face the monster from my nightmares and see her for what she really was, a broken woman who'd chosen to break others rather than heal herself. She looked small in the hospital bed. The stroke had taken her speech, but her eyes were alert, burning with the same intensity that had terrified me for 18 years. I sat in the visitor's chair, behind reinforced glass, and spoke. I'm not here to forgive you, I said. I'm here to tell you that you failed. Every generation, your poison got weaker. Great-grandmother broke bodies. You broke spirits. Mom broke minds. But each generation also produced resistors. Uncle Waylon. Uncle James. Me. Others you never even knew about. Her eyes narrowed, but she couldn't speak, couldn't spew her poison one last time. Your legacy isn't the fear you created. It's the strength you accidentally fostered in those who survived you. We're out here, all of us, breaking cycles, healing trauma, raising children who will never know your kind of love. You wanted to create a dynasty of control. Instead, you created an army of survivors. I stood to leave, then turned back one last time. The saddest part is that it didn't have to be this way. Whatever happened to you in Shanghai, whatever your mother did to you, you could have chosen to heal. To break the cycle yourself. Every day for 70 years, you chose cruelty instead. And now you'll die alone, your name a cautionary tale, your bloodline freed from your poison. She died 3 days later. I didn't attend the funeral. Neither did anyone else. The graduation. Next month, I graduate with my bachelor's degree. It's a year early. I took summer courses, driven by something I couldn't name at first. Dr. Kim helped me realize it wasn't the old fear driving me, but genuine passion. I love what I'm studying. I'm good at it. And for the first time in my life, my achievements are purely mine. The graduation ceremony will be small. My chosen family will be there. Uncle James is flying in from Portland. David Steinberg promised to attend. Even Harrison Blackwood and his family are coming. My parents won't be there, obviously. They're both still in prison, though my father might get early release for good behavior in a few years. Sometimes I wonder what they'll do when they get out. Where they'll go. Who they'll become when they can't define themselves by their control over me. I've legally changed my name. Not dramatically, I'm still Sasha. But now I'm Sasha Wei-Lin, honoring the great-great-uncle who saw the poison and created the antidote. My diploma will have that name on it, the first achievement of my new life. The full circle. Last week, I received an email that made me cry for an hour. It was from a girl in Ohio, 15 years old, trapped in a family so similar to mine it was eerie. She'd seen the documentary, found my foundation, was begging for help. But that wasn't what made me cry. It was her last line, "You give me hope that there's a Sasha inside me too, someone who can bend without breaking." I wrote her back immediately, connected her with resources, had our legal team start documenting her case. She's got 3 more years until she's 18, but we're creating her escape plan now. She emails me every day, just a line or two, letting me know she's surviving. Yesterday she wrote, "I recorded them for the first time. They didn't notice. The jade is learning to bend." This is how cycles break. Not in grand gestures but in small acts of rebellion. In voices whispering this isn't right. In hands reaching out for help. In survivors becoming lifelines for the still trapped. The future. I'm applying to graduate programs now. PhD in clinical psychology with a specialization in family trauma. I want to be the therapist I needed when I was 7, 12, 15. The one who would have seen through the perfect family facade and asked the right questions. Quinn and I are moving in together after graduation. We found a little house with a garden where she can paint and I can write. We're talking about marriage, about kids, about the future in ways I never thought I'd be able to. Sometimes I still have nightmares. I wake up thinking I'm back in that house, that the last 2 years have been a dream, that I'm about to be punished for imagining escape. Quinn holds me through those moments, reminding me what's real with her solid presence. But more often now, I have different dreams. I dream of the children I might have someday, growing up free. I dream of the book helping someone escape. I dream of my parents, old and gray, finally understanding what they lost, not when I left, but the day they chose control over love. The message. If you're reading this and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something: the cage door is open. It's been open all along. They've just convinced you that the world outside is scarier than the torture within. It's not. Yes, it's hard. Yes, you'll struggle. Yes, there will be days when their voices in your head are louder than your own. But there will also be moments of such profound freedom that you'll cry from the sheer relief of it. The first time you make a mistake and no one screams at you. The first time you say no without being punished. The first time someone loves you without conditions. You're stronger than you know. You've been surviving expert-level psychological torture. Once you're free, regular life challenges will feel manageable in comparison. Document everything. Find your David Steinberg, the person who sees the truth and will help you escape. Trust that small voice inside that says this isn't right, even when everyone around you insists it is. And remember, they only have power over you as long as you believe their lies about who you are. You are not broken. You are not worthless. You are not crazy. You are a survivor, and that makes you magnificent. The final entry. This morning, I woke up without checking the locks. I ate breakfast without inspecting it for tampering. I chose my clothes based on what I liked, not what would avoid criticism. I kissed Quinn goodbye without wondering if I'd done something wrong. I attended classes where my opinions matter. I worked at the foundation, helping survivor number 892 start her escape plan. Tonight, I'll go home to people who love me for who I am, not what I can do for them. I'll eat dinner without fear. I'll go to bed without terror. I'll dream of futures that would have been impossible in that house in Pittsford. This is what victory looks like. Not grand gestures or viral moments. Just ordinary life lived without fear. The simple, revolutionary act of existing as myself. My name is Sasha Whalen. I survived 18 years of generational trauma. I broke a curse that had plagued my family for decades. I claimed my inheritance, not just the money, but the right to live free from poison dressed as love. And I won. Not because they're in prison, though that helps. Not because I have $3.3 million, though that certainly doesn't hurt. I won because every single day I wake up and choose to heal rather than hurt, to build rather than break, to love rather than control. The curse ends with me. And from its ashes, something beautiful is already growing. The following was added to the manuscript after initial completion, at the publisher's request for closure. I'm writing this from a coffee shop in Seattle, my daughter sleeping in the carrier against my chest. Yes, daughter. Quinn and I adopted her 6 months ago, a beautiful 2-year-old named Lily. We kept her name, reclaiming it from my grandmother's poison, transforming it into something pure. Lily's birth parents were teenagers in an abusive family situation. They chose us specifically because of our story, because they knew we'd understand what she needed protection from. The adoption agent said they'd watched the documentary and read every article about the foundation. We want her to grow up strong, they'd written in their letter. Like you. My mother was released from prison last year, sentence reduced for good behavior and completion of intensive therapy. She sent one letter through my lawyer. I have learned that love and control are not synonymous. I understand if you never want contact. I am attempting to build a life that doesn't require victims. Your father and I are divorced. I live alone, work in a grocery store, attend therapy twice a week. I am learning to be human at 54 years old. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know I finally understand what I stole from you. I didn't respond, but I didn't burn the letter either. Growth, perhaps, on both our parts. My father remains in prison. He refuses all therapy, maintains his innocence, writes weekly letters to anyone who will listen about the conspiracy against him. He'll be released in 3 years. I have a restraining order ready to file the day he walks out. The foundation has helped over 3,000 people escape abusive families. We have safe houses in 12 cities, a network of lawyers who work pro bono, therapists who understand generational trauma. Uncle James sits on our board. David Steinberg is our legal advisor. Harrison Blackwood is our biggest donor after me. But the work that makes me proudest is the prevention program. We go into schools, teaching children that love doesn't hurt, that families should be safe, that it's okay to ask for help. Last month, a teacher called to say one of her students had come forward about abuse after our presentation. She said the lady with the jade story told her it was okay to tell, the teacher said, crying. You saved her life. Jade. It's become our symbol at the foundation. The stone that appears delicate but is incredibly strong. That can be carved and shaped but never truly broken. Survivors wear small jade pendants, assigned to each other, I bent but didn't shatter. Quinn's latest art exhibition is titled After the Fire. It's a series of paintings about renewal, about what grows in ground that's been burned clear. The centerpiece is a portrait of our family, her, me, and Lily, standing in a garden full of impossible flowers, things that shouldn't grow together but do. The gallery is donating all proceeds to the foundation. My book was published last year. It's required reading in several psychology programs now. I get emails daily from people saying it helped them recognize their abuse, escape their families, start healing. Each one is a victory, another crack in the cycle. But the best part of my life isn't the public victories. It's the private moments. Teaching Lily that crying is okay, that anger can be expressed safely, that no is a complete sentence. Watching her run to us without fear when she falls. Hearing her laugh without looking over her shoulder. Seeing her trust that love is consistent, available, unconditional. Sometimes I think about the path from that attic where I found Uncle James's letter to here. The years of abuse, the moment of breaking free, the trials, the healing, the building of a new life. It shouldn't have been possible. Statistically, I should have repeated the pattern or been destroyed by it. But Uncle Waylon was right. Some jade bends but doesn't shatter. Some people take poison and become medicine. Some cycles are meant to be broken. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get to watch the garden grow where the poison used to be.